Welcome, guys, to the Behind the Shield podcast. My name is James Gearing, and this is episode 88, and I am so excited to bring you my next guest. Imagine, if you will, that you are a young boy. You grow up for your first 10 years or so, innocent, playing, dancing, listening to music, and then one day a civil war erupts in your country. Your family are killed, and you are captured by one of the guerrilla groups and forced to be a boy soldier. The alternative is death. You're fed drugs. You're deconditioned by having to kill other people. And that's all you know for a few years. And then one day you are rescued by someone from the West, and then have to undo all that trauma that you've been through. Well, that is Ishmael's story in a nutshell. And when I read his book, I was blown away. It recalibrated everything in my life. It changed the way I raised my son. And it certainly changed the way when I woke up, whether I thought I was having a good day or not. If there's a roof over my head, if there's food in my stomach and my family's, if no one's trying to kill us that day, then we're doing pretty bloody well. So I wanted to bring Ishmael's story to you guys because every single human needs to hear this story to learn what true forgiveness is, what true kindness and compassion are. And then obviously what he's doing with this journey he's been through to avoid that happening or try and stop that happening for the young men and women that are out there around the planet that are still being forced into war by these horrible people. So before I bring you Ishmael, as I always say, please go to iTunes, rate the show, and please share the hell out of this. The links are going to be all over social media. Just click it and share it, put it on your feed, and get every single person you can listening to this story and obviously then the other incredible people that we have on the show. But to me, if you listen to this incredible journey that he went through and are not so moved and then look at your whole life a little differently, then I'm going to be amazed. So that being said, I introduce to you Ishmael Beah. Enjoy. So Ishmael, thank you so much for joining us on the Behind the Shield podcast. I have loved your work, and we'll go into that in a little while. But excuse me, I'm choking on a cookie. I can't believe that I was reading your book all those years ago, and now here we are, and we're having this conversation. So, firstly, thank you, and secondly, where are we finding you on planet Earth today?
Thank you, James. I'm actually in Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. So I'm in West Africa. So that's where I am at the moment.
Okay. So I, if it's okay with you, I'd love to just start at the very, very beginning. So can you tell me where you were born and also what your family was like? So what your mother and father did as a profession and how many brothers and sisters you had?
I was born in Sierra Leone in West Africa. It's a very small country there. And I was born in the southern part of it. So I was in a very small village. And my mother was a businesswoman. She did sort of small trade. You know, she would sell fish and pepper and salt and those kinds of everyday goods. And my father was... he went to school for a little bit, maybe a first year of university, and then stopped because he couldn't afford it. And then he worked for a mining company that was in the country as what do you call it? He did a lot of soil sample testing, so as a geologist.
Oh, okay.
He did that for a company. Yeah, so that was his background. So, and I was the second born in a family of 3 boys. So I had an older brother and a younger sibling.
Okay, now, what was, because obviously we're going to go into this incredible story of, you know, sadly how Sierra Leone changed while you were young, but can you paint a picture of what life was like before the Civil War broke out?
Before the Civil War broke out, life was very simple and beautiful and amazing. I mean, it was what I knew, but I also, in retrospect, I see how simple and very community-oriented it was. You know, I grew up in a place where everyone knew your great grandfather, So as a young boy, I was very troublesome. That was not very good for me because I couldn't get away with a lot of things. But I went. There was a river that fed into an ocean, so I would go swimming in the river, would dive and look for oysters and spearfish. I went hunting with my uncles. My grandfather was an imam, so he was an Arabic scholar. So I studied under him for a little bit, And I also played football or soccer for North America, and so I would play football every day, and I would go swimming. I took showers in the river, and I would go home. We didn't have electricity or tap water or any of these things, but it was not really an issue at the time. I didn't think it was something that I was missing because that wasn't my life, So it was very beautiful and simple, and I basically ran around all day causing trouble.
Now, was it a small village or a large town? What's the size of the place that you lived?
As I was growing up, it was a small village where there were maybe about 200-300 people. But then as time went on, because there was a mining company nearby, the village became a small town, so which meant that there are people that you didn't necessarily know. So it grew bigger as I was growing up, and so things changed. But initially, when I was very young, when I was 6, 7, it was very, very small.
Okay, the reason I ask is I've had a guest on called Sebastian Junger who talks about the tribal mentality or how as humans we're supposed to be, we're supposed to be in these groups of smaller tribes, and then as cities expand, obviously we lose an element of that. So it's interesting talking to someone that was in a village of about 200. Did you find it was things were better while the tribe was smaller or the village was smaller?
Yes, I believe Sebastian is correct in this assumption, which is that the idea of tribe has kind of gained a negative connotation over the years. When people think tribe, they think it's very much like this bad thing. But I think what was amazing about it was that there was a strong sense of community. There was a belief that yes, there's an individual, that people are individuals, they can do their own thing, but there was a very strong belief also that the individual needs were never going to supersede that of the community when it came to really important issues, right? That everybody would sit down and discuss. So I remember as a kid, for example, I'll give you 2 examples. One was if somebody wronged somebody, for example, there was a fight or whatever the issue was, or, somebody slept with another person's wife or somebody robbed somebody. Basically, the entire village sat down with the elders in the middle of the circle, men and women, and they listened to both parties of the story. And somebody will say, this person did this to me, and this is what it did to me and my family. And the other person will explain why they did it. But as young boys and girls, you sat down and you listened. And then the witnesses came and they said everything. And then basically the community then sat together and decided who was wrong based on what they've heard, and also what the punishment would be. And the punishment was not punitive at all. It was very restorative. For example, the punishment would be you're going to spend 1 week with this person to brush their farm. From an outsider, it would look like this is not good. But what this did is that when you went to brush somebody's farm with them, you spent 6-7 hours of the day with them, laboring, and you ate together. They brought you food. You drank from the same cup or gourd of water. So eventually, the 2 of you are going to talk about what has happened between yourselves without the village intervention. And you're going to sort it out. After 1 week together, you're going to find a way to deal. So people will come back to the village having decided however they wanted to patch up things, and that will be the end of it. The other part is that if somebody had been given land, the town distributed land to build houses based on how big your family was and what your need was for land to build a home. And then the entire village would pitch in. So the carpenters would be around, the masoners would be around, the little boys who go like me will go fetch water or sand or stone. And basically the village would pitch in day after day until the new neighbor's house was finished. And then it became everywhere. You understand? So that was the kind of life that I grew up in, where it was very much everybody cared for each other deeply and everybody had a stake in things, So, and when, of course, my village became a town, that was less and less. And therefore, people would turn another eye when somebody was being robbed or harassed next to them. They would say, well, it's not my business, or I don't know this person, So and that changed, you know.
It's amazing looking, at the less developed areas of the world, and here we are now, and not everyone, but a lot of us now are so wealthy, as far as material items and creature comforts, but we're just searching for this happiness. And you look at, the villages in Asia, in Africa, the Native Americans before we got here. And the model was already there, and it seemed to be working very well. And obviously, there was still violence and tribal conflict, but that model of the community seems to be the one that we need to, to look backwards instead of thinking we've always got to progress, and look and learn from these tribes that have existed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and say, all right, maybe they were right, and we went a little bit too far.
Yeah, I think that, obviously, I think development and modernization is not completely a bad thing. There are certain things that, I've lived in the West for a number of years, and so there are certain things that people could benefit from in these environments. But, as I think as we develop in the concept of modernism, is that we forget to be human, to reflect. We forget to build our characteristics. We're after the material things so much that perhaps we forget. I don't want to use a religious term, but maybe like a spiritual. We forget our own spiritual growth, our growth as human beings in terms of character, and we forget those things. And I think in big urban environments, we quickly forget that human closeness that had allowed humanity to constantly survive and overcome. If you look at history, the times that human beings have been able to get over things is when we come together, right? When something happens to us. And we decide to come together as a group, as a community, as a neighborhood, and stand up against something or try to fix something, then it works. Somehow, I remember I used to live in New York, but perhaps I'm fast forwarding, and at some point there was a whole power cut on the Eastern Seaboard a few summers, and everybody came out and sat on the street and shared their food and talked to each other. And it felt so amazing, but yet the lights were off. You couldn't really see each other, but people were so human. And as soon as the lights came back on, everybody went back into their apartments. They stopped saying hello to each other again. It's like, all right, wasn't that a little test that, we can still have these lights on, and we can have those amazing things that makes us comfortable, but we don't need to forget to acknowledge each other's humanity. Once we start to do that, we lose something. We gain something, modernization and individuality, but we also lose certain connections.
Yeah, and that's what he talks about. I mean, a lot of the examples that he had used were London in the bombing of World War II, or after 9/11 in New York, where they were seeing the sense of community. And just like you said, when the dust settled, everyone kind of went back to losing the very thing that pulled them together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, so you're obviously having this early childhood, in your village. You're seeing growth in the town. Now, what was the resource that they were mining that expanded?
Well, in this part in the southern part, we had a lot of mineral that's called rutile. We also had bauxite, iron ore, some diamonds. So you had there's American Australian company that was there, and there was a German company in the next town. So there are a lot of foreigners in the area, but mostly men, white men who were working for these companies. And so basically those are the minerals that they were extracting from the area. And of course, this brought about its own thing. Even before the war started, this started to change the town that I grew up in, the village that became a town. For example, the water sources were a little bit polluted with mining, because the particular kind of mining they were doing, they had to create these artificial dams to flood some of the area so that they can dig what they wanted to dig. And so some of these waters then went into the natural waters that we had and polluted them. And then we needed pump water, which was not available. And then so difficulties began in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, it's gut wrenching to think of, what the impact is of some of these industries to the people around, even wherever they are on the planet.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, these minerals, they serve certain things, and obviously, if they can be extracted, and there's a benefit to the community, I think everybody's for that. I think, but it's when there is none, and then when also it creates these issues that are not remedied. For example, we were a very subsistence farming community where we grew rice, we grew cassava, we grew the things we needed, and we sold them to get money to buy other things we couldn't produce, like salt and whatnot. And so, but when they destroyed the land, and there was no longer arable land for farming, obviously people either left or went to the capital city or tried to find job within the company itself, And so things changed, and then this meant that they now had to rely upon other sources of food that their bodies were probably not used to digesting, and that came with it other issues.
Yeah, and that's something obviously we see here in the West, where we have food-like products a lot of times and not real food. So one of my favorite sayings I've heard people say about the America, for example, is that we're overfed but malnourished. So obviously we're
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So what were the first signs that you saw through your actual own eyes as a young boy that there were, rumblings of some sort of conflict about to begin?
Well, the very earliest memory I remember, I think I must have been like 9 years old, and I remember my father waking me up very late at night, which was the first time he'd done that, and telling me that take this bag and that bag and come with me. And I was a little bit confused because, I was still trying to wake up. And then I asked him, well, what are we doing? And then he said, just follow me and be hush, be quiet about it. So I went and I saw other young boys who were my age with their fathers. And we basically walked out of town and went deep into the forest. And when we arrived there was this clearing, an open area, and there are all these traders that usually will sell things in town. They were all there selling different products that they are normally sold in their shops. And so my father and other family people were buying and putting them in bags, and I carried them back, and we returned before morning. And so I asked my father, what is this? And he says, oh, there's price control. And I didn't really quite understand what that was until the next morning, when basically you had a lot of, sort of a new police that had been formed that showed up wearing trench coats, and they had Israeli Uzis under them. And they basically would come to a shop and they would put a trader under gunpoint, and they would decide what the price of commodities in that shop was for that day. And what had happened was that the government, which I later learned, was that the government that was in power at the time, the APC, had basically decided to do what was called price control, because they felt the prices of goods were going up. So instead of subsidizing, the market or whatever, they just decided to hire a military that came and basically put the price down. So that was my first, I guess, introduction to what was going on in the country and what was changing, because I'd never seen that. And as that year continued, I began to not have certain amount of food that I used to eat because there was scarcity in getting things. And that's when I began to understand that. But it was years later that the war started. But I've always remembered those moments as probably that's when things were really beginning to fall apart. If I was as a child at 9, I was beginning to see those kind of signs. It meant that thoughts have probably been seeing audits that I wasn't necessarily paying attention to because I was a kid.
Now, how did that price control pay out? Did it work like they hoped it had?
No, it didn't. I mean, I was a kid, 9 years old, but I thought to myself, I'm not an economist or anything, but I don't think that works. That's not how you change it. I didn't know the solutions, but I just thought it wasn't going to work, because you can't just come and tell people, I don't care how much you bought your product, you have to sell it at this price now,
Yeah.
And obviously, yeah.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, it seems to me like it would just destroy, the shops eventually, because they were undercutting and not able to make a profit, and then the food would go away.
Absolutely. So that's why the shops closed down. So everybody closed down their shops, and they were not around during the day. And so if you wanted to buy, you went to meet them where you could buy the right price, And it was unfortunate. I thought to myself, well, that cannot work, I mean. But somehow, whoever was in power felt that this was the policy, and they put it in place. I mean, the resources that went into training a few of these guys and buying them Israeli Uzis and trench coats in the hot weather, something else could have been done with all that money. But anyway.
Well, it sounds like the same philosophy applies all over the world with the leaders, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was your first glimpse. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of walking us through what the next few years were like until that, god awful day where, your whole life changed.
Well, the next few years, basically, things progressively got worse. There was more and more scarcity of food, and then the teachers were not getting paid. So a lot of teachers stopped coming to school to teach. Some schools began to collapse because school materials and government support was not coming anymore. And then hospitals started to close down, and it was basically the country began to fall apart. And then we began to see people coming from the eastern part of my country towards the south, running for their lives. They were carrying a few bags and their children, and they looked very disturbed from their faces. These are not faces that we used to see. And we asked them what had happened, and they said, well, a war had started in the country, and there were people destroying their homes, and soldiers were fighting this group called the RUF, the Revolutionary United Front, that was going to overthrow the country. And they started burning their homes and taking their children and throwing them into the fighting. I didn't believe what they were saying. In fact, I think a few people in my community thought people were exaggerating a lot of these things, because this is not the community we grew up in. This is not to say we never seen fights and things like that, but not this level. We've never seen war or anything like that. So we did not believe it until maybe a year after that. The war began to come closer and closer. So you began to see people you knew from the next village actually coming through your village running. So you began to worry a little bit that can't be wrong, But one day, my older brother was into American hip hop music because of the mining company, and so he taught me how to dance, to do the Running Man. We had our hair done like the MC Hammer, old school style, and all that stuff. My father did not like any of this at all. He was very upset. So we would participate in these talent shows that were put around, with similar kids doing all of these things, Vanilla Ice moves and all this stuff. So anyway, we had gone to a talent show in another town called Matrujong, and while we were there, my town was attacked. Mobimo. And so my older brother and this other friend we were with, Taloi, decided to go back. So we crossed the river and started walking. And there were a huge number of people coming against us. We're going against this tide of a lot of people. And so there were boys younger than me. At this time I was 12. There were boys younger than me who were running, looking for their parents. There are people, blood on different parts of their bodies, people carrying children who looked shot. And so we continued walking, and we just couldn't believe that this had actually reached us, what we'd been hearing about. So we stopped at a village called Kabati, which is my grandmother's village that I used to walk to from Mogimo. And while we were sitting there just trying to decide what are we going to do, we saw two things that for me really brought everything home. I began to realize that my life had changed, that it was not going to go back to what it had been. Was that first we saw this older man who was carrying his son, and in his arms he was holding the boy, and the boy had been shot, and he was dead, but nobody wanted to tell him because he thought the boy was still alive, and I guess that was what was keeping him running from the war. So nobody wanted to tell him so that he would stop and lose hope and probably get compromised. So everybody just urged him on, and he just continued running. But I'd never seen a man in my community, I'd never seen a grown man, cry so hopelessly and helplessly, And so that really tormented me for a bit. And then the next image that I saw was this woman, back in my part of the world, women have this thing they call waistcloth. So they tie their children around their back with it so that their hands would be free to do other things. And so there was this woman who had been running with a child tied behind her back. And she had been running, and she stopped at where we were watching these people coming. And she wanted to rest, and she sat down under this mango tree and removed her child. And it was a girl. And this child had been killed as she was running. And you could see the blood and the bullet hole, and you could see how the trail of blood had followed her. And basically the only reason why she was alive was because she carried this baby on her back. But you can imagine just the confusion of a mother realizing that she's alive because her baby had been shot. She had carried her baby on her back. And I remember just this interrupted, innocent smile on the face of this child but also this mother, there was so much pain in her face that she could not even cry. She was completely in shock. And so looking at these images, I thought to myself, wow, okay, this is gone. This is really gone. Like, if that child could be shot, then who was stopping anybody from shooting any other person, you know? So from that day on, I knew my life had changed. And of course, we decided not to continue running toward where everybody else was running away from. And we went back to Matrujong and basically I started running from the war from that day on.
Okay, so I just want to kind of underline your life before. So before, you were a young boy, you were playing football, you were listening to hip hop when you had this influence, you were going to talent competitions. That sounds the same as any other neighborhood pretty much around the world. And then almost overnight, you're seeing all these people fleeing, and not just, you know, soldiers with battle wounds, but obviously clear signs of some sort of genocide beginning.
Yes, absolutely. And so from that day on, you know, besides having been a boy who loved hip hop, I also went to school. Sierra Leone being a former British colony, we had, you know, I love Shakespeare. I used to recite certain lines from Shakespeare. And I was actually thinking I wanted to be an economist and all this stuff. So all of that was no longer possible because everything was collapsing. So I basically began running from the war from that day on. So between 12 and 13, constantly, every day, I was running for my life. I was learning things that I never knew I would learn. For example, just how to survive, you know, how to avoid being shot, how to, towns were ambushed randomly, you know, and you had to run into the bush and try to sleep there. So people will abandon towns, which I did, and you went and slept in the bush because if you slept in your house, it could be attacked at night by the rebels or even the government army, and they will basically shoot up everybody. And sometimes they will lock people, literally, they will put padlocks on doors and they will set houses on fire and burn you in there completely. So to avoid that, you had to leave town at night and go sleep in the bushes. And then you come back during the day to see if the town was still standing, if they hadn't burned it, and to look for food and then go back, you know. So this basically became a constant. And prior to this, I had not really left my part of the country. So it wasn't as if I knew that if I ran this way, I'll be safe or I'll be heading towards the capital city. I had no idea. You know, it was because of the war that I started the movement. So I just basically ran away from the gunshots. If there was fighting in this direction, I ran the other way. And if there was fighting in the other direction, I ran the other way. So I basically, everybody was being knocked around by whichever side of, you know, of them that they were hearing the war and the gunshots. And along the way also, we lost people, you know, like, I'd seen people buried before, but I'd never seen somebody shot and killed or die because of hunger. And these things were happening as we were running. Some friends of mine died on the way. They were shot, or maybe they ate something and they were poisoned. And we buried them, and we took their clothes off, or we took their shoes off, things that were useful to us, and just continued on. And we tried not to think about them because that would weaken your resolve from continuing on. So these things that as a child, I was 12 years old. At 12, you don't really have, your parents don't sit you down and teach you these kinds of things, you know. They would hope that you don't, you know. So you sort of basically learning, and I was separated from everybody. So, you know, people had been separated from each other. So I was basically constantly running with other kids I would find, and then I'll lose some of them and we'll continue finding other ones. Yeah.
My goodness. So the group that you were originally with for the talent contest, you lost them, and now you were literally going from group to group to group as you fled the conflict.
Yes, exactly. So I was separated from my older brother and then from this other friend, Taloy. And then I found a group of other kids that I'd been to school with, to primary school with, and I knew them. So we got together. Now about seven of us actually. So we continued running. And with this group of kids, we lost different, and, you know, we picked some people along the way. But there was also, what kept us alive around that time was this desire that we'll be able to find our families, you know, so we looked for them, and that was the motivation. So every day we would talk to people. Have you seen this family member of mine, or that uncle of mine, or my father, or my mother? And people would say, well, I think I saw them. We're running towards that village in that direction, and we'll go towards that direction. And they were not there because people kept moving, you know. You don't know. So basically, this is what was keeping me alive, at least, and some of the friends also that I was with, because we're all from the same town. So we ran, but while we were running, the nature of the war changed. In the beginning, there were adults fighting, and there was word around that they were recruiting children, but it wasn't really as strong. But then that became really sort of the norm of the war, where one of the ways they would recruit children was that they would attack a town and they would gather all the young people, boys and girls, and they would put weapons in their hands and they would line up their grandparents, their fathers, their mothers, and they'll basically have the children shoot them. And so those children would not return to their communities anymore because of that. So they belonged to this group. So it was a very deliberate way of, and some of the adults who have survived these experiences, when they saw young boys and young girls like myself running from the war, they no longer trusted your innocence. They thought you were part of that group, or maybe you were spying on when to attack the town. So people distrusted your innocence. If you can imagine, you're 12, 13 running from war. And if you're more than one or two in a group, people either ran away from you, or if they could in certain towns, they attacked us and tried to kill us. So you imagine as a kid running, you're running from madness, looking for a family, and you become this threat, to people. So that meant we bypassed a lot of towns and villages, which meant that we couldn't have access to food. So we started to go through severe hunger, and it was just an awful situation, and the whole time we're trying to look for our families, and, that didn't happen,
Now, what was... You went from this peaceful, life in the village. What was the motivation of these guerrillas coming through, attacking these villages to be so deliberate? I mean, I can understand if they were being shot at and they were shooting back, but to be too deliberate to go by village to village to village to the point of locking you guys in a house and setting fire to it. What was the underlying reason for that genocide?
Well, I mean, the idea is that, as most places in the world, wars usually starts with some sort of ideology, right? But it's very hard to keep an ideology going, And so the RUF, the Revolutionary United Front, had really started because we wanted to get rid of this political party that had been in power for 20-something years, and they basically destroyed the country. And though that was needed, when the RUF started, they had lost their intellectual branch of the movement. So it was the military branch that jump-started the war, and they didn't know how to keep the ideology alive. They felt if they came to any town and say we're fighting against the government, people would just embrace them. But when they came to a town, they shot weapons in the air and they attacked the army, and during those fights, people died. So people tried to run for their lives, and they felt people were running away from them. So slowly they started to get very upset, But also other people saw this as an opportunity to use them, because there are a lot of natural resources in the areas they were roaming around. So they armed them to cause chaos so that they can just have access to the diamond wells and all this stuff. So there's a lot of things that were going on at the same time. Also, they needed to recruit people. And people were not being willingly coming to be recruited. So they started to force people to the cause. And basically the war got out of hand. And so the military also lost its command structure, So if you are not in the capital city or one of the big towns, the military basically was left on the countryside to fend for itself. So a few of the commanders thought, hey, why don't we benefit from the war as well? So then different groups started to spring up doing their own thing on the side. So at some point it got really confusing. Were they really rebels or were they soldiers? So basically it got really confusing. People were just trying to fend for their lives, and violence became the order of the day, basically. So they come through a town, they will loot everything, they will, shoot up banks, blow up vaults, take all the money. They will go to shops and take clothes and whatnot. So basically, if you had weapons, you're part of a group, you survived. If not, you became a prey to whatever that group that came through that town wanted to do. So that was the nature of it. And also, I think why this war, in my opinion, why this war became really violent, were for several folds. For a number of years, the majority of the people in the country had no sort of power at all. None. They felt left out, and all of a sudden, if you joined a little group, you were a sub-commander of a group, you had this incredible power, right? So you felt, wow, I can do anything and nothing can come of it, And so I think it got to some people a little bit. So.
Right.
And then...
Yeah, I think a little bit is an understatement from what you went through.
It is an understatement, certainly. It got to a lot of people a lot. And also, to maintain the chaos, we had more arms and ammunition than anything else in the country at some point. So obviously that explains what then happens, You have a lot of traumatized people, a lot of people who are not professional soldiers who don't really know what to do with it. So basically, they used it to get whatever limited resources were available. So it became a big fight even for that.
Right. Now, that's a good question. Where were the weapons coming from?
Oh, they're coming from everywhere. I remember, when I came out of the war, I remember I was in university in the United States and I was studying, political science. And there was a huge discussion in my classroom about, where are these weapons that fuel these civil wars? They're coming from China. China was there. And I was just sitting in the classroom and I was smiling because nobody knew about my background. And I probably was the only person in the room that actually, not based on research, I've actually been in the field and seen where these weapons were coming from. But obviously, I had no way of telling anybody. That meant I had to talk about myself. So I just laughed. Yes, the weapons do come from China. The weapons also come from the Cold War, Soviet Union and things like that. The weapons also do come from Israel. The weapons come from the United States. The weapons come from Germany. They come from everywhere. Basically, everybody is selling weapons into these wars, So we had M16s, we had G4s, we had AK-47s of different brand, machine guns, Israeli Uzis, you name it, everything was there because it was an open market. The border was porous, so anybody who could bring in arms and ammunition, you will get hard-cut diamonds and take them out in boxes. So basically, people were making a tremendous profit. So they came from all over the world, and we had mercenary groups coming to help fight this with this group or that group. So it was basically everybody wanted to have a piece of the pie. So weapons were coming from everywhere, and everybody was willing to sell them. And that's the nature of what fuel these sorts of things even more so. And because Sierra Leone, we don't really produce weapons. We don't not even partly, we don't even assemble them. And all of a sudden, there was so much. It was easier at the time during the war in Sierra Leone. It was easier to buy an AK-47 than to buy chicken or to buy a bag of rice. You could easily find an AK-47 around the corner. In fact, you don't even have to find one. If you went in the forest running around, you probably will see a few dead soldiers and you pick up a few rifles from their bodies, some ammunition, and you basically can defend yourself if you knew how to shoot properly. So that basically what became. So now, if you do the math, you realize that there are people definitely bringing it in through Liberia and also landing at our airport and then leaving, nobody knowing whether they were in the country or not. So they were coming from everywhere. So.
Yeah. I just want to highlight that. I think it's disgusting, and that there was that whole blood diamond kind of catchphrase keyword thing a while ago, but I mean, here we are having this conversation, and you are someone whose family was literally killed, and the form of payment for those weapons were the diamonds that I'm sure people around this country are wearing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of people will say, well, it's business, but yes, I always say to those people, you can still do business and make profit out of it. It doesn't have to cost human life to that extent,
Yeah, exactly.
You can give weapons to armies if they are defending their people or they are protecting people, right? I can see that, but when you go into a place where there's literally genocide going on and you decide to arm everybody who's part of that genocide and think it's just business, I don't really think so,
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's disgusting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to move on to that then. So, you were fleeing, and just the courage and the strength that you and all the other boys and girls must have had to get through that, and to clothe yourselves and feed yourself and find water that wasn't poisoned, and all these other challenges that you must have had, as well as obviously trying not to get killed at the same time. It just absolutely baffles me. But I know obviously a big part of the book is that you do get captured at one point. So can you tell me about, that awful day and then, the weeks following that?
Well, as we had been running from this war, what kept us alive was this desire to find our families. And, we ended up finding out that, the group that I was with, and that our families were in one village and everybody had managed to get there. It was a safe village. And we were very excited. So we started going for it, using our last bit of strength to get there. Closer to the village, we heard gunshots and, shoot up. People were shooting in the air. We weren't sure whether it was an attack or what it was. And we waited and hid in the bushes. And when it was over, we saw this massive fire. So basically, the whole place was being set on fire. And we decided to go because we knew what that meant. At this point, we had survived so many. It meant that whatever had happened had concluded, and they had left wherever they were. So we entered the village, and basically everybody had been killed in the village. Some people had been thrown in the fire. People had been lined up and shot, basically, at the back of their head. So basically, they had killed everybody in the town. And this was the place where my family was. So I went from one day hoping and to get in touch with my family and find them again and continue running from them from the war, to find them all had been killed in this village, including some of the friends that I was with, their families. They turn bodies around, you see people. And basically, I froze, basically, like I stopped functioning, I think, emotionally, because it was so shocking. And even my feet, I couldn't move for quite a bit. And I was very angry because I felt that it was because we had slowed down, we didn't make it in time. At this point, I had come to really accept the fact that if at least I had entered the village earlier, even if I had been killed there, along with my family, that would have been a better option, because the pain was just so severe to bear, And some of the kids that I was with, I don't know where they found the strength, decided that we should move, just in case some of these people who had done this damage decided to return. We shouldn't be there, and there was nothing we could do. So we left. And basically, I was in a daze. Like I couldn't believe that I'd fallen into this kind of hell. And so they basically pushed me along the way. And then we went to a military base at this point, thinking, these guys said they were Sierra Leone military. Maybe if we went there, we'll be safe. We had nothing anymore. We knew we couldn't go back home anymore. We didn't have any more families. So we went to this village it's a place called Fuloya. And basically in this village, it was basically where lots of other young people had made similar decisions and who had lost family had come there. And it was the Sierra Leone army that was there. We didn't know at the time that it was a part of the army that had broken from the central command. They were basically doing whatever they wanted. So we stayed in the village and we helped out to cook, cut vegetables, fetch water for the soldiers. And so basically we thought, okay, maybe this is where we'll stay because we're safe for now. But that changed very shortly. They basically gave the ultimatum, if you lived in this village and you were able-bodied, that you needed to be trained to fight. Otherwise, you had to leave. But that was not an option, actually. It seemed like an option. If you decided to leave, which they showed a lot of examples of, if you decided to leave, they would basically shoot you. And then they'll bring the body back in town to show, and then they would tell people that, this is what happened when you try to leave. There are other guys over there trying to kill everybody. But everybody knew that wasn't the case. So basically, you couldn't leave. So at this point, I was 13. And, basically, they decided to train us. There were other kids who were younger than me. They decided to train us to be soldiers. We didn't believe that they were really doing that because it was like we were so small. What possibly were we going to be able to do? But they knew exactly what they were doing. I mean, we didn't receive massive training as in soldiers who trained for years. We were training in the middle of war. So you knew you were going to fight very shortly. About a week of training, which was not much training, we basically knew how to shoot a basic weapon and, how to change the magazine, how to clean it a little bit and to put it back together. And then how to adhere to certain commands, how to make an ambush. And then basically we went to war after that. And so basically everything you've learned, you went to test it out, and some people did not come back. So basically that was how my life became, a kid running from this madness, from this war that I'd seen, now to being part of it, really. Yeah.
And in the book, you're talking about how the tactics they use to desensitize the kids as well.
Yes, in the beginning, first there was coercion, right? They made you stay. And then there was a lot of rhetoric about revenge, and this worked for everybody because everybody was there had lost their family. So they say, if you're part of this group, we'll find those guys and make them pay. And also we'll make sure that this didn't doesn't happen to other children like you. Everybody adhered to that. Everybody thought, okay, this is a good reason. Of course, we wanted some justice. And then there was also um, this sort of they gave you a little bit of drugs, amphetamines here and there. We watch Rambo films, Commando films, so people got into this world of how cool this violence was, or how sensational things were. And basically, they also made you visualize things. They would explain different ways how people's families have been mutilated, and then they made you visualize somebody who was responsible for it and kill them. So basically, they brought prisoners that were alive when they caught them during war, and it wasn't to hold them or anything. It was basically for practice. So they would give you a bayonet and they would say, "Oh, we'll kill this prisoner," and they'll put images in your head. This is what they did to your family, and then you basically. So there was this game that we played. Whoever could kill somebody very quickly with a bayonet without shooting them, but you can do it quickly. And of course, the commanders will do a demonstration, and then everybody will be lined up, and then we'll have to do these things, And you'll be surprised how quickly you get adjusted to a given situation as a child. This became our world, and we realized very quickly if you wanted to survive in it, you had to embrace it fully. There was no other option. Otherwise, you would die just emotionally, So I adjusted very quickly because I knew this was the only way to live, because I had nowhere to go. And the army slowly became our family. It became our new family. We fought for each other. The kids were part of it. We wanted to keep each other alive. And I remember the first day I went to war, the whole time I was thinking to myself, I don't believe this is possible. But there we were in ambush, and we saw other people who looked just like us. They had kids and adults, and people started to exchange fire. I couldn't shoot for a while, but then everybody who was laying next to me was being shot and killed, and their blood was all over the place. Where I started shooting, realizing that if I don't shoot, I'm going to end up like them. Basically, that was the end of my childhood in many ways.
Yeah, and again, what you've just said resonates the same way as you hear a lot of soldiers from different conflicts that I've had on here, where the reasons are left back in wherever they were made as far as why the war's starting. But by that point, it's it's preservation. You've got this army ahead of you that's trying to kill you, and you're basically trying to kill them. So it doesn't matter, what the initial reason was for the men and women on the front line there. You only have one choice, which is to try and protect yourself and make it through whatever conflict you're in.
Absolutely. It's either kill or be killed. I think that's what people don't understand about war. Like people who haven't been in that situation, they always think that you can make these moral and ethical choices while you're standing there, right? Somebody else is shooting at you. You cannot say, "Hey, I'm a really nice guy from California. Let's talk about it, brother. I'm a hippie." That's not going to work. That's not going to work, If you want to get back home, that's not going to work. You know what I mean? So you basically have to shoot. So in war, you can't discuss that sort of humanity. There's very little space for it, if any at all, And, and if you want to come back to your family, they always upset, when I started living in the United States, and I'd come from this world, most people didn't know. And I went to certain very liberal arts schools, with a lot of very privileged American kids. And, granted, that's good to be privileged. But what was really upsetting to me all the time is how sometimes when there was a war, for example, in Afghanistan and things like that, and soldiers would come back, and how people would shout at them and throw things at them. And I always said to my friends, you don't know what's going on. Like this soldier didn't make that policy. If he went to fight and he wanted to come back to his family, he had to do what he needed to do. There was nothing he could do about it, He's not going to go and represent your moral and ethical cause in the United States when somebody's shooting at him. He can't make that decision. The decision has already been made for him when he's there out on the field, And for you to function in a battlefield, you have to reach that point where you dehumanize other people. Otherwise, you can't live, And so I always try to explain to some friends who didn't know my background at the time, and they looked at me like I was this strange, And I don't protest against the soldiers. If you have to protest against something else, not against the person who's there, But it comes from a lack of understanding, of what's going on in these places. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's such a an amazing insight that you have, but there's so many parallels, whether it's you, which was such an extreme example. You didn't go to a recruitment office and sign up. There you are, your whole family was murdered. You're put on drugs. You're forced to kill. You're given these images of revenge. I mean, like you said, everything that you had when we were talking at the beginning, your entire life was basically dust now. It disappeared, and all you had was your own survival.
Absolutely.
And you've got this opposing force trying to take that very last thing you have, which is your life. So to question that, I mean, you of course question it, but to not be able to understand, why you were doing what you were doing at the time you have to comprehend the backstory to really understand, why the boy soldiers of either side were there and doing what they were doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, as you said, it's when people don't understand the context of it, maybe it's easy to judge, and to think that people just embrace violence. Nobody wakes up one day and just decide to just embrace violence. I mean, maybe there are a few people who are just evil like that, but on that massive scale in a country where most young people were soldiers, I don't think they all woke up one morning and decided, what, we should all just be soldiers and like mess things up,
Yeah, exactly.
So there are things that led to it, and often when you come out, sometimes people don't understand that, but also I understand the other side of it, particularly in my country. People who had suffered at the hands of some of what we have done at the time were so angry they didn't have the capacity to see beyond, what we were, to see the context of what our lives were. So I understand that hurt as well. That hurt had been manipulated when I had one, and that's how I embraced the violence fully. So I knew where they were coming from as well, So
yeah, which is just a horrible place to be from either side.
Absolutely.
So what I want to do, I don't want to dwell on your time, actually fighting the war, because I think the beauty is obviously after that. So if we can, firstly, how many years were you actually there before you were moved to the camp in Freetown?
I was there for nearly close to 3 years, 2.5 plus years, So basically, from when I was 13 all the way to when I was about 16, I was in this war. And so you can imagine a civil war context is basically every day is fighting. Every day. Every single day there's ambush. You fight for territory. You move around when the rains come. You're moving from one place to another, So basically, and we're walking, this type of guerrilla warfare, we didn't have vehicles we can jump in and drive. We walked all the time. We ran and did things. So it was very, very physically, it was very challenging. So I was in this madness. I'd gotten completely accustomed to violence. That's all I knew. I didn't fear anything because I didn't really care for my life anymore. And then one day I was removed from this war because the United Nations, particularly UNICEF, they had spoken to whatever the existing government in Sierra Leone was at the time, that they needed to remove all the young people from the fighting if there was going to be an end to the war. And they needed to start that process. And so they would come into some of the various fighting groups and talk to the commanding officer and try to remove the children from the ranks. And so we basically lined up and I was removed. I believe I was removed because I looked more like a child. There was no denying it, There are some kids who are my age, but maybe they were bigger kids, They were more muscular and they had to verify their ages and whatnot. And I was brought to a rehabilitation center in the capital city of my country on the outside. So it was the first time I came to the capital city of my country. I'd fought in a war for it, but I'd never been to the capital city. And then I started going through this transformation, a rehabilitation, a psychological rehabilitation, psychosocial therapy, and all these things to recover. And that was the most difficult time for me, actually. Perhaps more so than the war, because I had to remember everything again. And this time I couldn't take the drugs. I couldn't, use the violence and the trauma to cope with it. I was basically left to really face it. And that, when you come out of war, I think your mind becomes your new enemy, and it can torment you tremendously,
So what was it within that rehabilitation period that worked, that got you from this day-to-day, war-torn soldier through to being able to transition to a place where peace was an everyday thing?
Well, first, it was the fact that there was a center like this available, to start with. And the fact that of the time that I had there, I had about 6 months just at this center, trying to recover. And also the staff who worked at the center were incredible. Like when we got there, we didn't, of course, we attacked them, we hurt people in different ways. But there was always something about them that, even though they didn't say that, and sometimes they would say it's not your fault, but there was also something, also the way they looked at you, that they saw you just as a child, regardless of what you've done and what you've been through. They saw you as a child, and some of them even saw you as a child that they had failed to help, That's why you find yourself in this situation. And somehow that did something to us slowly. There was one particular nurse who worked at the center that I became very close to. And that's how I began to change. I began to realize some things about me were changing. When I expected certain things. Prior to that, I didn't have any expectations. I didn't even believe in the possibility of the next day or anything like that. So slowly, with a lot of psychosocial therapy, some medicines used to even help me to sleep, and constant counseling, group counseling. We went to school at the center. We played football. I began to get back to myself again, slowly.
Okay, and I heard you in, I forget which one it was now, but one of the other interviews that I heard you on a while ago, a big thing was, and you mentioned this for a second, was being able to understand that it wasn't your fault, to not blame yourself for this journey that you'd been on.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in the beginning, when the nurses would say it and the therapists, you didn't really believe them. You thought, okay, they're just saying that. Well, slowly you began to understand what they were saying. That doesn't meant that I believed them at that time, but I think it made it easier to think about what you had been a part of and to look at it differently. Now, when I came out of this, there's a lot of guilt for surviving. There are other kids who fought just like me, were trained like me, and they didn't survive. There were kids that couldn't come through rehabilitation. I didn't come through easily, but it took them much longer. And during that time, maybe they found themselves back in the army again, and then they got killed. So you felt guilty because of that. I even felt guilty the fact that I was adopted in a family in the United States where I went to live and to go to school, to the point that I used to not eat for a few days because I knew there are people who were still going through what I'd come out of, So there's guilt on every level when you come out of it. But, and then slowly that always rang in my head. Remember that it's not your fault. I can punish myself I didn't start the war in Sierra Leone. So therefore I couldn't really hold myself for the rest of my life accountable because I was in it, But it requires some very skillful people to put that into my head, and for me to understand it slowly.
Yeah. Well, the people I've had on the show so far, and the not the research, but the work that I've been lucky enough to read and learn from, you pretty much had every level of trauma that you can have as well when it comes to mental health. I mean, you were forced to kill, you lost your family, you had the drugs, I'm sure there was sleep deprivation. I mean, all these layers. Absolutely. So what I love about your story is, and we talked about, I think I mentioned it when we went back and forth on Twitter when we first started talking, is your story is what I use as a benchmark when I ever hear anyone throwing themselves what we call a pity party, feeling sorry for themselves.
Absolutely.
Because, and I genuinely, I'm not saying this because we're just having this conversation, since my little boy, who's now 10, which is why this story resonates so deeply with me, because his age now is pretty much your last year, of innocence, as it were, is how I've raised my son, because I've had divorce and some very minor things, but in the grand scale of what boys just like yourself are suffering, in all continents at the moment, we are so blessed. And I grew up in England, now I live in the US, so blessed. And stories like yours, where you were, make me so grateful for what I've been born into. But then stories of where you took yourself and who you are now makes me admire so much, and shows me that you can heal from anything if you have that willing to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the reason why I wanted to tell the story was because of that. I wanted people to understand how a child finds themselves in this situation, but also how they can come out. I really wanted people to understand that the human spirit, all of us have that strength within us. And when we're ready to do it, and when we have the right support, it can actually work, that we shouldn't give up on people, But also I wanted people to appreciate what they have. I remember when I was in school, I had a scholarship in a school in the U.S. and for high school. And a lot of my friends would complain about a lot of things. And granted, if I grew up in the context, I'm sure I'll complain about the same things, but, but then when you try to look at them, if you look at it, like you said, in the grand scheme of what's going on in the world, there's really nothing that they should have been complaining about. But it's because there was nothing to really look at for them to appreciate what it meant, to have peace in their lives, to have parents who annoyed them just because they were checking on them,
Yeah, which is love.
Which is love. Yeah, I used to tell my friends, they didn't know anything. I was like, you guys don't understand that there are lots of people in the world who would do anything to have a parent who wants to know where they are at 8:00 p.m. and annoy the hell out of them because they want to know where they are,
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right.
People who would do anything to have that. So when you have it and you think it's a problem, you really should relax a little bit, about it, But obviously, I didn't know my background, so I wasn't going to. I don't know. Maybe they just thought this guy's just a strange fellow,
Well, I love that, and I want to get to that next because there's a story, and I'll get you just to kind of complete the transition from Freetown to New York. But after that, there's a specific story that I heard you talk or tell on The Moth, and I don't normally like to try and get the same stories over and over again, but and I'm sure you know which one it is. But that to me is such a poignant story. So before we kind of delve into that, so you were at Freetown, you completed the rehabilitation. So how did you get from Sierra Leone to the US?
So I was in Freetown. So when you are at the rehabilitation center, they do what they call family tracing. They try to find if there's any existing family member of yours alive. And they first start by digging up your immediate family if nobody could be found. And it's a small country, so people are liable to find them easily. And then they would look for extended family. They'll start with uncles and aunts. So they found my uncle who lived in the capital city, who I knew of, but I'd never met. So I went to live with him and his family. And it was difficult because the capital city hadn't experienced the war. So there was a lot of stigma associated, with people like me coming from the war. So while I was living with my uncle, an opportunity came to send 2 young people to New York to speak at the United Nations about coming out of this experience, as a way to showcase that what the United Nations was doing was working, that more of it needed to be done and funded. And so a lot of young people were brought from all over the world, there are kids from Colombia, from various other African countries, from Sri Lanka and different places. So we were all brought together. It was my first time traveling outside of my country. I'd only been able to come to the capital city because of the war. I didn't have anything. So they helped me get a passport. And I remember jumping on the plane and we arrived in New York. It was winter of 1996. It was absolutely cold. I didn't think I wanted to live in the United States. Absolutely not. Because I thought to myself, it's not possible that anybody can survive in this kind of climate. Where I was coming from, 59 degrees is our winter. Like when it dropped to 58, this is when we were colder. And we sit around fire. And all of a sudden I was in this place, and taking the plane was already an ordeal, and then, we get to this place. But during this conference, I met this woman, Laura Sims, who was one of the facilitators of the conference. We became friends. I went back to Sierra Leone and she stayed in touch with me. And, she said, you need to go back to school. I will send you some money for school and whatnot. But then the capital city, when I returned, the capital city fell. The war reached and took over the entire city. At this point, the entire country. And they were recruiting people again and throwing them back into the fighting. And so because I had this passport and I knew this woman from Brussels, she told me, you have to get out of there. You cannot stay there and fight again. And I didn't think I would survive. And during that time, my uncle died. So that was basically really like send the message home to me that you have to leave. So basically one day I just walked out of my country. Long story short, I ended up going to the next country illegally as a refugee. I went to other countries and eventually was able to get a visa to the United States, which was not easy because nobody wanted to give me one because of my background. And when I arrived in the United States, nobody wanted to take me into any school because I didn't have any records to show that I'd been in school. I only entered the country with my passport, actually. And this woman who adopted me waiting to pick me up at the airport, and that was basically it. So the rest was a lot of struggle and to prove to people that I'd existed prior to when they encountered me. And I didn't have any report cards, none of these things. I didn't have medical records. I remember they had to take me to everything to even get dental. And I always found the whole situation quite funny. I would tell them, I'm quite healthy. I mean, I've been running from a war for a number of years.
Eating from the land.
Eating from the land. I'm still around. My teeth is fine. I didn't have money for candy or anything like that. So
that's the irony, isn't it? This poor boy soldier had better oral hygiene than the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I laughed when you told this next thing. I'm gonna put it in your brain now. I came from England, and I had my degree from England, all my papers with my degree, but it was long enough ago where my high school transcripts, I had misplaced them in all the moves, and I was having a problem trying to replace them. But I had a degree. I had my university degree papers there. So my common sense thinks, well, that's not going to be a problem because they're just going to take my degree. I had a nightmare trying to prove that I went to school even though I had a university degree. So, but that pales in comparison to yours. So when you were interviewed by some of these high schools, because I just kind of want to preface this. So you had so many months to get into a school, otherwise you'd be sent back to Sierra Leone. Is that right?
Yes, because the visa that was given to me was a prospective student visa, which meant that I would come to the US. If I get accepted in the school, then I will stay on, Otherwise, I would have to go back.
Right.
So it was very important that I got accepted in a school in the amount of time that the visa, which was 3 months, and it was in the summer. So that also made it quite difficult. So schools were closed, and some school administrators were around. So we went for interviews, and the first thing they were asked, okay, let's see the school records. And we're like, well, there are no school records, And I remember someone saying, well, everybody has a school record. If you've been to school before, you should have a school record. And I remember saying, I know a lot of people who don't have school records. Even if they've been to school before. So I remember making this joke, which I thought some of the school administrators didn't get it, and maybe they thought I was more traumatized than they thought. I said to them, I'm coming from a country that is still at war. And, when your town is attacked, your village is attacked, and you're running for your life, I don't really think you're thinking about your school report card, and thinking to myself, well, I should find my report card. This is the most essential thing. You run for your life, And they didn't have the sense of humor, all of them almost, and they looked at me like, yeah, well, we can't really take you if you don't have a report card. So basically, yeah, I ended up writing an essay, because everybody was demanding this. So I wrote this essay. It was my first piece of writing that I began to take writing seriously from that day on. And the essay was titled, Why I Do Not Have a Report Card. So in that essay, I explained where I was coming from and why I don't have one, but I know that I went to school. And that though where I'm living now, the measurement of how you can prove your honesty was through a paper, that paper does not exist. So is it that people believe me or not? That's basically it. There was no way I was going to go into the rubbles of a small village in Sierra Leone or some school that, and try to dig through it. It's not possible.
So with this crazy notion of common sense overpowering rules and regulations, were you successful?
Yes, I finally found somebody who had the common sense to realize that, well, first of all, if this kid is from an African country and we are interviewing him in English and he seems to be speaking it well, and he wrote an essay in English, he must have been to school. Yeah.
There we go. Exactly.
Somebody who finally finally somebody who had at least was willing to use their brain somehow, and so I was taken into a school, but it was also on probation, because my background also became a problem, right? I wasn't like every other young boy. I had this history, and we were not hiding it. So the school principals would know, and they decided to tell the Parents Teachers Association. They decided to tell some of the parents, most of them, that we had this kid we're going to take in our school. We think, he's intelligent. We think that by giving him this opportunity, he could change his life. But he has a background. And at the time, most people were not familiar about a former child soldier, well, are they really healed? Are they not? Would they go back to violence, So all these questions nobody had an answer to. Even though I was on the corner saying that I can give you the answer, no way. I'm interested in any of that stuff, I know wasn't gonna listen to me, It's like, okay, I'm sure you say that. And so I felt watched even when I was in school, right? I was on football team again, on the playground. Sometimes I see some of my friends were wrestling, and if I try to jump in, I would see all the teachers basically like their eyes peeling back because they're thinking, oh boy, the former child who just jumping into the wrestle fight, or what is that going to turn into? I could feel them from, I'd also been trained as a soldier, so I could feel when their eyes on me and people are thinking a certain way, right? So I couldn't really be a kid as much as I wanted to. I couldn't play around in the playground and play rough, Everything was being watched, Yeah,
it's amazing, and that's what I want to get into with the next story. But like you said, you literally had your childhood snatched from you when when the war started. But even when the war was done, you're running from the war initially, and the parents don't trust you, or the adults don't trust you because they think you might be a child soldier now. And then you get liberated, and now you're still, being viewed this way. So, once that conflict started, and the first set of people started running through your village holding dead kids, that was pretty much the end of your childhood there at the age of, was it 12?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Now, for the rest of my life, I then had to prove to people that I'm human and I was still a child. That I was okay. I had to prove to them, I still had this, even my mom, my family that adopted me, her friends used to call her. I overheard them over the phone conversation. She would whisper at night. They would call her late at night to check on her if she was okay, because she had adopted this former child soldier who was living in the house with her. They tell her, oh, you should hide the knives, I used to think to myself, so these people really think that, okay, I survived a war all the way, took a plane all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. I landed in New York. And then I'm just going to try and murder the woman who's actually trying to save my life,
Yeah, Mom, I was going to murder you yesterday, but I couldn't find any knives anywhere.
I couldn't find any knives anywhere, I'm going to come out to, it's like, seriously. Anyways, of course I couldn't make jokes with it because then they were not going to freak out even more, right?
Exactly.
So I just looked at them and kind of laughed, and try to show them otherwise. I was probably the only person who truly understood the nature of violence, and hence the reason why I wanted to stay from, and also my friends that I was making in New York, some of them in high school too, they didn't know my background. They would tell me, yeah, New York City is a very rough city. We need to prepare you for the streets of New York, because you seem like a really weak African kid. But New York is a hard place, man. It's a jungle, you have to survive. And I used to think, you guys have no idea what a jungle is. I'm sure New York is a jungle in its own right, but Manhattan on East 14th Street is no jungle, man,
It's not Sierra Leone in the middle of the Civil War.
It's not Sierra Leone jungle. I'm sure you can get somebody can beat you up on 14th Street, but it's not going to be nearly as bad.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to talk about that because I love that, and so now you're in New York and you've got obviously this history, but you've gone through the rehabilitation, and now you've got these friends that grew up in New York City, and one of them suggests playing paintball one day. So please, if you could tell us a story right from the beginning. I think it's just it summarizes your entire journey, and then coming over here.
Well, so they didn't know my background, so I'd made some friends, and some of them had always thought that I was a little strange, because I was very much appreciative about so many things that they took for granted. But anyway, I was pretty nice fellow, quiet, all that, So they thought, hey man, let's invite Ishmael to play paintballs, So it was a group of boys. One of them, their family had a property upstate New York, so big open land, and they said, come with us this weekend. We're going to play paintball. I didn't know what the game was, I'd never heard of it. And I said, what is the game? They said, you love it. When we get there, we'll show you. Just tell your mom you're coming with us. So I told my mom, yeah, I'm going upstate. So I said, sure, you made some new friends. That's cool, the parents were all in on it. So I packed up. We went to upstate New York. We got there in the evening, and they said, tomorrow we're going to play. And so they showed me the equipment. I'm thinking to myself, oh, no, I said, all right. Sounds like a game I've played before, maybe not necessarily the same way, So they're all excited. They're telling me about how this is like the most amazing game you play, and I asked them, I was trying to pretend that I didn't really know. And they showed me this is the all the equipment and everything. So at night, all of a sudden, my whole sort of, guerrilla warfare mentality a little bit kicked in, soldier, So at night, while they were sleeping, I got up and I went and basically did a little recon all over the terrain where I was supposed to play. So I did rule number one, preparation, right? Preparation is key in everything, right? So there I was, looking at every tree, measuring paces between this shed and that shed, and kind of getting the hang, and I came back and slept. So the next morning, everybody stood up, and and one of them was very adamant, don't take off your helmet, because when you think nobody's watching, someone's going to hit you in the face with the ball. I said, got it, So we decided to start playing, let's do one-on-one first, and then team, whatever, And so each time I'm like winning, each time, and I'm finding the whole thing really funny, right? But they're so serious, these kids, very serious. So they said to me, hey, man, you sure you've never played paintball before? I said, no, I have not played paintball before, which was true. I'd never played paintball before, but I'd been in a war before, which they didn't know.
But there was no paint.
But there was no paint. So they said, well, how come you're so good at it? Like, what? I was like, well, you guys are really great teachers. You just really explained the game really well to me. So I owe it to you guys, At some point, I had to sit out of the game so they could have fun. But what was really interesting about the whole experience for me is that, I really wanted to explain to them so much, but it required me to give them context of my life. I really wanted to explain to them that I was so grateful for them. And I hope they appreciate the fact that the only violence they would ever come close to experiencing was the one they pretended to play at, and that was so cool and that was so amazing. I wish they understood that, but I couldn't, because I needed to explain my life to them, and it wasn't really the space for it, So I just observed them, and I thought to them, how lucky are they? They should feel so lucky, and I always remember that. Now, of course, when I decided to write the book, some of these friends, I called them to tell them, remember when we went upstate and we were playing paintball and I was winning the match? Well, I kind of wrote a book about why that was the case. And then they'll be like, what do you mean? So I explained something, and they were like, whoa. If they had known, they would have never invited me to play.
They would have been terrified.
They would have been terrified, exactly, But we got to express our childhood and versions of it, And that really meant a lot to me. And I always enjoy the fact that they try to look after me, thinking that I'm just another child, which also I appreciated. Without the other information. But eventually, most of them found out who I was, So.
Yeah, I wonder what they thought when we were running through their head, all the flashbacks they had. And, that's why.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. They were like, oh man, that guy. They understood all the guerrilla tactics I was using on them, because they were trying to do all this crawling and stuff they clearly watch in Rambo films. I could tell. I was like, okay, man, this is not Hollywood. You got to do your recon from day one. You got to practice. My mom, by the way, when I returned and my mom found out that I'd played this game, she was terrified. And I said, oh, come on. So I tried to explain to my mom, I know what the difference is between the reality of violence and the game, So it wasn't like I was going to be shooting paintball at them and all of a sudden I was going to go back in like Civil War mode in Sierra Leone,
Yeah.
But I understood also where she was coming from. She was my mother, so her primary concern is to worry. Now that I'm a father, I understand that completely, when you're, you can't help it but worry about your kids. It's just the nature of it.
Well, exactly. Especially after, what you've seen in your lifetime so far. And I'm worried about, my son being out past dark in case, he gets hit by a car or something. But I mean, your vision of what potentially could happen is even higher. So yeah, it's got to make you a pretty neurotic dad now.
No, I try not to worry so much like that. Obviously, I want to protect my children, but I one of the worries that I'd had, when I thought back in my life that I wanted to have children, was one of the things is that I don't want to give them my eyes. I don't want to make them live life because of what I've experienced. Because then I will limit them. At the same time, I'm aware of how the world is, but I don't want them to fear the world because of, of what I've seen. And it's very easy for parents to do because, we want to protect our children. So we want to tell them what we know. We want to prepare them for the big bad world, which to some extent it has a lot of things going on in there, but, I always say, like if my daughter, her only heartache ever in life is some boy didn't call her, I would rather have her have that, even if it's shallow, I'd rather have her have that heartache and nothing more, right? I don't want to tell anything. Obviously, I will find the boy and tune them up a little, but that's another story.
Find the old bayonet.
That's another story. I used to joke with my wife. I was, we had this, our first child, our daughter. She's now 4, and she always says to me, "What will happen when the boy comes to take your daughter on a date?" And I say, "Oh yeah, I've thought about it. I've thought about it." And she said, "What are you gonna do?" And I was like, "Oh, I've thought about it, And I was like, "I'm just gonna give them one of my first book, a memoir, and I'm gonna open to one of the pages and be like, read this paragraph. You see that stuff? I still know how to do it." So, 8:30.
8:15, he's there at the doorstep.
Yeah, 8:15, and my wife, I'm not gonna let you do that. Obviously, I'm joking. I won't traumatize a poor kid like that, but I did think about it.
Well, I love that what you just said. I don't want to give them my eyes, because a lot of people listening are firefighters, paramedics, police officers, soldiers, and it is, that we have that balance too, where obviously we see the horrible things, especially things, like violence, driving, some of these awful things that happen to these people out there. Trying to find that balance too between warning them and making sure they don't make, poor choices when they're out there, but not scaring them to death and traumatizing them with, like you said, with your eyes.
Yeah, it is a difficult balance. I tell you, it's not easy, because you can see, but what you said, the key word that you said is to give them the right tools to make the proper decisions for their own lives, to tell them not to make careless decisions and to think, to trust their instincts, to be mindful around themselves, to think for themselves, and not let other people think for them. And these are you prepare them, and then you let them go in the world, and you hope that they make the simple mistakes, that they can rebound back from easily, and basically that's it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. There's many mistakes where you just grow stronger from. There's some that you don't survive, and obviously those are the ones you want to avoid. But the other ones, they just make you a stronger person. So they're healthy too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really, people who are in the who make these choices in this sort of service professions, really like human service professions. I always admire the fact that, like particularly when you come from devastation, like me coming from a country where that mentality did not necessarily exist, you know what I mean? Like you put yourself in harm's way to save somebody's life, it's quite a noble thing, because I come from a part of the world where, maybe it used to be there when there was just a community aspect, but at some point during the war, that was not the case, with a lot of people, So to see that people actually make those decisions and make it a career and a profession, it's quite normal to see, that, yeah. But I commend those sort of things, Actually, what is it? I met, I lived in California for a bit, and there were lots of fires in California, and always, it always, warmed my heart a little bit when I would see all these firefighters just really taking the charge and making sure that people were safe, and going to people's aid in very, very difficult circumstances, Again, when we show our humanity, right? And for me, why this really means a lot to me is because my life is what it is now, is because each turn of my life that changed my life is because somebody decided to give me a little help, give me a little hand, to acknowledge my humanity, to realize that, wait, I have the power to change the course of this person's life by making this, by coming to their aid a certain way. And that set me on another path that pushed me up a little, and that's why I'm possible. So I very much appreciate these sorts of gestures, when we recognize each other's humanity. regardless of where we're from, what we are, what we're doing, and
Yeah, well, I mean, just to underline what you said, and I think you've touched so many lives. I mean, we're having this conversation because you touched mine, there's no question, which is also indirectly related to how my son was raised. But I heard it was another lady I had an interview with, and she compared the pen and the gun. But I just kind of want to add to her observation, because she was talking about them both being symbols of power. My observation is, in Sierra Leone, the gun was used, and obviously, really what came out of it was just a huge amount of death. I mean, it's just all tragedy. But here you are with a pen in your hand, and you've done so much good, inspired so many people, and you're now an ambassador for making sure that children aren't used as soldiers, and for that simple change and putting the written word back in your hand, as you loved when you were young, is again your service. You came from that violence, which didn't work, and obviously you weren't given an option to even participate in the first place. You were forced to. But what that experience then did, and all the positive ways that you've managed to touch people, not only in your own country but all around the planet, is a huge testament to, like you said, what turning around and having that sense of giving back, that sense of service can do, versus just trying to force and bully your way into getting people to do what you want to do.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better. No, I mean, yeah, that definitely, and you mentioned something earlier also, which is that, I think in life, what I've come to learn the hard way, but what I've come to learn is that, obviously I don't wish bad things to happen to anyone at all, or to go through what I went through. But whenever something happens to us, I think we have two choices, right? We can either just look at it as just complete horror, which is probably our natural impulse first to go that way route. Or we can also look at the situation and realize that, all right, how did it shape me? How did it shape my character? And what good can I extrapolate from it, even though it's seemingly horrible situation, And at some point in my life, I had to make those decisions, because either I would have allowed the trauma of the war to kill me, or I can beat myself up and victimize myself for the rest of my life, which is what most people would do sometimes. A good number of people take that route, right? They've been through something, they victimize themselves and beat themselves up about it. Or I can actually look at it and be like, you know what, I'm still alive. I survived that mess. Why waste time anymore in my life? What am I going to do useful with this life, this second chance that I've gotten to live? What am I going to do with it, And how dedicated am I going to really use that, whatever it is that I choose to do? How am I going to dedicate my life really, truly to it, so that I can do it well and also help other people, So I made that decision. I knew very well if I went the other way, it would kill me, just the traumas and the memories of it. And so I even decided to make those things useful. For example, I had a lot of insomnia when I came out of the war. When I came out of the war in the 90s, like most people didn't have the war they have now. PTSD was not yet around, right? It was just like, it's just some crazy dude, who was like sort of freaking out from time to time, and waking up in the middle of the night. If you had a girlfriend who thought you're crazy, you woke up in the middle of the night next to her shouting, running for things, and they think, well, okay, I'm not coming to this one's house anymore. So basically there was nobody to really understand what was going on with you. But I had insomnia, tremendous insomnia. I couldn't sleep. And a lot of people suggested, you should see a doctor, they should take some medicine, and for a while it was an enticement to do that. And I thought to myself, you know what? Everybody's looking at it in the wrong way. I mean, I was in my 20s, I was a university student. I was having this incredible insomnia. I could stay up for about 22 hours of the day. I only need an hour and a half, 2 hours of sleep, and I'll be completely fine. I had no health issues. And I thought to myself, why would that be a problem? This is a good thing. I mean, I will do all my readings, do all my assignments. I will go out to a pub and have a drink, I will party, and I'll still have time, I'll still be up. So who would not want to have that kind of energy, So that's how I decided to look at it, and all of a sudden it was no longer a problem. It actually became this incredible advantage I had, where I was always on top of my schoolwork. I was also partying as much as I could, because I was time on my hands. I couldn't sleep, and it turned out great, even
Now, was there a point though where you did start sleeping again?
Yeah, there's a point. I sleep more now than before. Yes, it turned around a little bit at some point. But there, for a number of years, I couldn't. I could only get 2 hours of sleep if I was lucky in a given night.
Wow.
But I made use of it. I read incredibly. I read a lot. I wrote. I did extra readings. I partied. I did all sorts of things. Anyway. I even had some extra jobs, as I was in university. I wanted to make extra bucks so I could take those shifts at the radio station when nobody wanted to be there. I'll be the DJ if nobody's listening because I'll be up. I know I'll be listening to the music, so I'll play it.
Be your own DJ.
I'll be my own DJ. I play what I like. Nobody complains. So I did all this incredible thing, even observation. Like as a writer, I always tell people, when I write fiction, write novels, because of my background in the military, I know how to observe people so that they don't feel intruded upon, So if I decide to sit somewhere and observe a certain situation so I can write about it and develop characters out of it, I know how to do it so well. And I learned that from a very difficult situation, but it's repurposed to me in a way that I can make it useful, So that's how I look at my life, I think it's not when something happens, so you can't immediately make that decision, but eventually you have to decide how you want it. I could have been victimized myself all my life and be like, oh my God, I'm a child soldier. I lost my childhood. I'm never going to recover from it and just sulk around all my life. But what would that really do for me? A few people will feel sorry for me from time to time, but then they'll be like, you know what, man, forget you.
Yeah, no, I am, like I said, that's exactly what I got from your book, and that's what I, was just dying to talk to you about and hear that, set that baseline, and then where you are now. But you touched on the book, so I want to ask some wrap up questions because you've already been talking for an hour and a half, and you've been so generous, but I think it needed that full hour and a half just to tease out some of the points of your incredible story. But I want to talk about the book very quickly. So at what point did you decide it was time to put this journey that you've been on paper?
Well, I think it started really coming in my head when, people would ask me, as I said earlier, about where's your report card or you should provide it. And I thought people did not understand the context of where I was coming from. And then also when I was in university, Sierra Leone became really notorious in the news for the wrong reasons, obviously, because of the violence had reached a certain point that shocked the world, amputation that had been part of the war had become increasing. The number had grown, people had been amputated. And so I remember watching CNN and people talking about Sierra Leone and just, it seemed like it was just a country where we all woke up one morning and just decided to go around amputating each other. And there was no context whatsoever. And then there was also the issue of child soldiers. People were basically calling us the lost generation. And there are some people who had done research and concluded that because we had been through this war, at a very young age, we've been introduced to violence. Therefore, we would become violence adults. We would never be able to change. Then basically we were done for. That even if we pretended to change, we're just time bombs waiting to explode. Something could happen and we would set off, And I was in the United States, in university, at the top of my class. Most people did not know my background. And yet I was not exploding anywhere, So I thought to myself, so I was quite upset. I thought this is not correct, and this kind of way can only bring fear and make it impossible for other young people who really need to recover to do that. And I had this opportunity to have an education. So I decided to start writing slowly about it, not with the desire to publish. I thought to prepare myself. So if I was on a panel, on a debate, I'll be able to really say a few, important things succinctly. So I decided to start writing the book in university, and one of my professors read a few and shared it with another guy who was the creative writing department, and basically said, first of all, you have a talent to write, and secondly, you have an incredible story. You should write it. Whether you decide to publish it or not later, that's up to you, but you should write it while you're in university, and I'm going to make sure that you do. So basically, this professor, a friend of mine now, Dan Sean, who's a novelist, at Oberlin College in Ohio, basically twist my hand behind me and say, you sit there and write that story, and you keep it for your kids if you have children, for all I care, but you have to write it. So that's how I started writing the book, with never the intention to publish it. I never wanted to publish because it's too personal. And when I was done with it, I began to see the the need for it, And I took a chance, actually. I remember when I had a book deal, and that's when I finally understood what I'd done. I almost wanted to give back the contract because I realized that it meant that they're actually going to publish it, and they're going to have copies laying around. People are going to read it. They're going to know who I am. It absolutely freaked me out, and I wanted to return it. And my mother said, why don't you sit on it for a week and think about it? And obviously, I didn't return the contract. And I'm glad in retrospect that I didn't. But it changed my life. When the book came out, I didn't think it would get as popular and as successful as it did. Because I thought maybe people would fear the context and think, I don't want to read a book. It's not a book that's sad. It's about a sad situation, but it's a book that's incredibly hopeful, that I had hope. And people got that when they started reading it. And all of a sudden, it changed my life. I was living in Brooklyn. I just graduated from university, and I was renting a flat, an apartment, with a friend of mine. And we had put our name down for the telephone service and the cable service, And all of a sudden, one weekend, an excerpt of the book was in the New York Times Magazine. I was on the train from Brooklyn to Manhattan to see my mom. And I'm not joking. Literally, everybody across from me was reading this magazine, and my face was on the cover. So I'm sitting there on the train. And so people will read it and they'll put it down, an excerpt of, and they will look and they will see me. And they will twist their face thinking, it's not possible that this guy will be sitting across on the train. and they will start reading again, It was really incredibly fun. And then, of course, people could find my name, so they would call me and say, are you the guy who wrote the... And I was like, no, that's not me. So I would deny that. And so people would look at me and say, yeah, you look like that guy who wrote the book, a long way gone. Do you think you should read the book, young man? They would tell me. Some other person, okay, I'll try and read it, It was really funny. So anyway, but it was incredible, like what transpired, how much people were moved by the story, how it touched them. I'm glad I did it. But it was not easy to write, So.
No, I'm sure. Well, how I came across it was in Starbucks. I know that you guys had a deal with that where I think was it $2 from each sale went to UNICEF.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So and I was literally standing there waiting to get a coffee. So in a typical Western human mindset, you had the book had about 30 seconds to impress me, otherwise it was going back on the shelf. And I've never bought a book at Starbucks. I never have since. But I was there with my now ex-wife, and I was like, I gotta buy this book. And I sat there, and I am awful at reading. Usually I find it very hard to finish an entire book, unless it's a great one. And I sat down, and I think it was a day that I read the entire story and then reread it. And it's because, like you said, it's not... It's a sad environment, exactly like you said it, but it's a story of hope and gratitude and courage and forgiveness and all the lessons that every holy book seemingly tries to teach. But then there's this division, and these books are now fought over, which misses the whole point, in my opinion. But yeah, it's all the core teachings of the human spirit in one story, and it blew me away.
That's good. No, that was the desire for Starbucks. They had said that, I was editing the book when they approached us, the publisher, and they said they wanted, when people came to Starbucks to get a cup of coffee, to be introduced to a reality that's life-changing, so they wanted to buy these books and sell them at Starbucks, and people were a little skeptical. And then my response was that, well, don't we want to reach the Starbucks coffee drinker as well? As a human being, he wants to read a good story, so let's have it there, no? So I'm glad but for a number of years I couldn't go to Starbucks because everybody recognized me. So I was like, I'm not getting my.
So you're going to the competitors to get your coffee.
I made my own coffee at home. Only when I went to read at Starbucks, then I got a free coffee. But other than that, I couldn't go for a number of years.
Well, I wish they'd put it back on there, because there's a whole generation that's hasn't read it yet that I think should. And I'm not just saying this, if I had to do a must-read list of 5 books, yours would be in that 5. And if I had to choose just one, and there's many I've talked about on this show before, but if there was just one for every human being on the planet, I would choose your one. And I mean that 100%. There's some other ones that are fantastic that I talk about all the time. But Yeah, I think it's amazing. Now, a quick question about the story.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I
As
appreciate
you,
it.
no problem. As you wrote it, I've had many writers here, and I've actually done some writing myself, and obviously, very, very different level of trauma that I've seen in my life is more, in my careers, basically. But I found it very cathartic when I was writing. Did you have that experience as you were working your way through the story?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what it did for me that I didn't expect was that it was the first time that it allowed me to actually go back in the story on my own terms, remember it, not because of a flashback or anything, but go back into it, and which was incredibly difficult, but allowed me to actually observe the things that I'd lived through. I'd never really had the time to do that, you know? So for the 3 years that it took me to write it, not every day, but I really was able to observe my own experience, to learn more about myself, about what it is I'd been through, what had happened to me, and to even understand the way I was in the present, why I reacted to certain things, because I needed to understand the story. So I felt everything again, and they really, I think it was kind of not the end of my therapy, but it was kind of like a sort of closure to a lot of things. A lot of questions I had were answered. It was very, very incredibly difficult, but I'm glad that I did it. So it really did that for me. So when I finished writing it, even if I hadn't published it for that alone, I think on a personal level, it significantly changed my life because of that, because there's no way I wouldn't sit anybody down and tell them that story in one go like that, it'd be incredibly hard to do. But writing about it really gave me. And obviously, when I was writing also, I had the idea that, what, there's a lot that happened. I don't need to put everything in. I need to give enough so people understand what happened. But I also thought, okay, there are certain things that I need to live out for my family so that only they can know it. So I made certain decisions that also were very helpful, for my life. That was really, but it does definitely help. Writing has that healing. And then also you discover that what you're writing about, there's this writer, G.M. Coates, a South African writer. He says everything you write writes you as you write it. So when I was writing it, I really realized that even though it was my story, that the things that had happened to me and the lessons that I learned from it were bigger than one human being. So I was just a small part in the story, really. That it was a human story, that was a global human story that had entrances for everybody in the world to understand it, and that my life was just a catalyst for some of the points that needed to be made, and to realize that even your own story is more powerful than you are, was really something very incredible for me to arrive at by doing it.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that from many of the authors, and obviously I would assume it was going to be the same experience from you. So it's great to hear that. So I want to start wrapping up, ask for a couple of short questions. So we talked about A Long Way Gone. Radiance of Tomorrow is another title that you've written. Are there any others that you're working on that you have that I've missed?
I mean, I've written a lot of short stories and whatnot, but my next book is coming out hopefully at the end of the year, and it's another novel. So the title now is called The Lively Skeletons of Every Season, and that's the working title. So it's another novel set in an African country. The Radiance of Tomorrow was also another story that was set in a fictional place, but really looking at why people return to places that have been devastated by whatever that devastation was and how they learn to live there. So yeah, this will be my third book, and then there's after that, I've been convinced to write a sequel to A Long Way Gone. So after the next novel, I will pursue that. So we'll see how to the first book, yeah.
Excellent. Now, you just touched on something I forgot to ask you, and I'll make it very brief, but you have been back to Sierra Leone several times, so I won't say what is it like, because obviously it must have been traumatizing, but are you seeing a growth, a return gently towards the childhood that you once knew?
Unfortunately, not to the childhood that I once knew, but there's definitely a departure from the war that had happened that's gone. And maybe there are some people in Sierra Leone who don't even have a memory of it because they were born right after it ended, so which is good. But in terms of when the war ended and I started returning to Sierra Leone right away, I was living in the U.S. At the time. And it was difficult because you can still see the reminders of the war, burnt cars, houses that had bullet holes in them, but no, you cannot see any of this anymore in Sierra Leone. It's been long gone. But the politics is still complicated in the country. We actually just are wrapping up a presidential election for a new presidential candidate who should be announced any day now. So we had a non-violent election, at least not to the level of war. So things are moving up, but it's not going back to the childhood that I had. It's going somewhere else. People have different expectations. The war changed the country tremendously. The population shifted from being more village community lifestyle to everybody moving to the capital cities. And that brings about its own difficulties, So people don't really know how to live in this environment. The cities are crowded. If you live in the countryside like I did, you learn how to grow your own food, right? So if you don't have money, you can grow a crop, you can harvest it and eat it. But if you live in the capital city, you need to have money to buy everything.
Yeah, same as New York City.
Yeah, even water, you can't just go to the stream and get nice water and drink. So that brings about its own psychological effect it has on people. So the country has changed a lot, where there's other things. But it's also modern time. People need to catch up, but I wish it had been done slower than how people are kind of jumping into it and they don't understand it. So.
Yeah. Now, what took you to Nigeria?
I live in Nigeria now because my wife also actually works in protection. My wife is one of the very few people, including myself, but she does a full-time, who's a child protection specialist for UNICEF. She's a lawyer by background. And so she basically negotiates with warlords to release children from armed groups. This is her job that she does around the world.
Wow.
And, I think we're fitting for each other because we don't worry about each other going to these environments to do that. So that works. Otherwise. So basically, so she's posted in Nigeria at the moment. You know about Nigeria, what's going on in the north with the Boko Haram and all this kind of madness. So that's why we're here. We live in the capital, and then we go up to the north from time to time, both of us, to do that work.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, this one to kind of underline a point as well. That you hear a lot of negativity towards the UN, in some of the media outlets, but here we are talking to you because of the work of the UN and obviously UNICEF specifically. So, and then to hear that you guys are still out there saving these kids, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's against the international laws of war, rules of war, to use children as soldiers, and that's why it's such a huge deal. Apart from the human side, of course, but legally they're not supposed to be doing it as well.
Absolutely, legally the idea is that you can use children to fight in war that you create. That is a violation. And obviously that doesn't mean that people listen to it, they do it, but we're able to negotiate with certain armed groups because a lot of these commanders want to get engaged in politics, they want to become politicians later, and so we always say to them, well, if you want to be taken seriously and play in the international field, you need to respect certain international rules, otherwise nobody's going to take you seriously, So then they start to abide by things and whatnot. But what you say is that every organization has its own issues. The UN has a lot of issues that it could fix, that it could do well, and they get a few things right here and there, But the absence of this organization, a lot of other things will go unattended to if it wasn't around. That's the best way to look at it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Try and show the positive side. All right, so we've talked about your books. I'm going to ask those wrap-up questions now, even though I talked about it about 20 minutes ago now. So those are your books. So the first question I always ask, are there any books that you love that you recommend to other people? It can be about what we talked about, or it can be about something completely different.
Oh, I read a lot. I'm an avid reader. I'm always reading new things because I believe that as a writer, you have to read to be a good writer, in my opinion. Which, when I teach writing to kids, they don't like to hear. They just want. So I read a lot of things. I love a lot of books. What can I say? What have I been reading lately? I mean, along the issues of understanding historical war on the African continent. Since I live in Nigeria now, one that came to mind is this book called Half of a Yellow Sun. It's written by this writer called Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's very well known. It's called Half of a Yellow Sun. It's about a war. It's fiction, but it's historical fiction about a war that happened here in Nigeria many years ago, the Biafran War. It's a fantastic, fantastic book. That's I really enjoy. What else? Yeah, so I mean, that's since I'm in Nigeria now, I guess that's the first thing that came to mind for me to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, and we got all your books too. So what about a movie and or a documentary?
Oh, movie and or documentary. Well, I mean, I have a few favorite movies that I really like. One of my favorite movies as it relates to war and resistance is this film called The Battle of Algiers. It's an old film, and it's about the Algerian Revolution kicking out the French. But I mean, the film is just extraordinary and how it was done, and I think it's really one of the best films I've seen. And in terms of like coming of age story type of thing, there's this Italian film called Cinema Paradiso. It's one of my favorite films of all time. It's about this little boy who grew up. I guess I relate to it. It's about this little boy who grew up in a small Italian town, very troublesome. Became friends with a guy who was like showing the cinema, and then he grew up to be an adult. I mean, I won't give the whole story away, but it's one of my favorite films of all times. More war, Hollywood war type of films. There are two films that I really saw that I thought really captured war properly in Hollywood, and it was made by the same fellow, but two different sides of the story. Clint Eastwood is the one that directed this film. One is called Letters from Iwo Jima, and then Flags of Our Fathers. It's about the same event from the American perspective. I think these were one of the most brilliant war films made in Hollywood so far. And it really showed what war does to human beings when they're there, irrespective of where you're coming from, how nice your culture or your community is, when you find yourself in that madness, what happens. And I really love these films, yeah. Documentary. What kind of documentary? What is the documentary that I've seen there's so many documentaries that I've made now. I can't think of a documentary, to be honest, on the top of my head.
Okay, well, I'll throw one in there for a second that I couldn't find. It was a shame, but the one Bling that said online that you actually participated in, I couldn't find it anywhere. They've taken it off all the internet sites.
They've taken it off. It was a good documentary. I won't say it's the best thing I've ever seen, but it was more we're trying to make a connection between what we mentioned earlier, between resources, like how you connect people to what's going on, what seems far away from their life, but it's actually close enough, So the idea, a friend of mine, Raquel, she had this idea that what if we bring some of these American top hip-hop artists at the time to a place like Sierra Leone so they can understand where possibly the diamonds and the bling-bling they're wearing come from. So for them to understand the context, it wasn't for them not to buy diamonds ever in their lives, but for them to ask questions when they want to buy diamonds so that they can help to stop people from getting diamonds from these sort of places when wars are going on, People more conscious. That was the idea. It was a very interesting journey to make with all these American hip-hop artists.
When you were a little 10-year-old hip-hop fan doing dance recitals.
No, I was laughing because, I wish I had my own camera and I was just filming of the documentary. So I think that would have been really fantastic. But
would have been like Letters to Iwo Jima, like your perspective.
Yeah, because people have this public persona about how tough and things they are, and then you put them inside an environment and realize that they are nowhere near as tough as they say they are,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But actually, it made me think about this documentary. I think it was Sebastian who made it. It's called Restrepo. It's a really fantastic documentary. I just remember that one, yeah. I mean, talking about getting people there, and really having them experience, what is going on when, suppose these young guys live and go and fight a war,
Yeah, and again, they're just fighting for their life, just like you were saying before. They were stuck there, they didn't start the war, and those poor guys are up on the Hindu Kush just trying to stay alive and go home to their family.
Yeah, and they form a brotherhood. That's one thing that's really important about this kind of thing. You form a brotherhood and you form a friendship that's so much deeper, sometimes, and even blood relations, because you've seen the best and worst of each other in these trenches. Like it changes who you are. Completely. Yeah, I really love that. I wish he could do more of these kinds of stuff. Particularly nowadays, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a desire for it. I really do. I think with the stories I've had on here, I mean, obviously, yours especially, yours has been extremely powerful. But all the people I've had on, whether they're just coming from a fitness background or mental health, or they're a soldier, these stories are incredible. And you see the rubbish that we get, on the newspaper stands and the TVs and the social media. And this is one of my goals is to bring these incredible stories that are inspiring me, however I've come across them, and bring them back to the forefront. Because this, you leave, I leave, let me be selfish, I leave a conversation with someone like you a better person, whereas if I'm watching, the 15th season of crab fishing, I don't think I'm going to be a better person. So...
Yeah, no, but Emma, I mean, it was what we were talking about earlier, right? Like, I mean, I've come to this conclusion that, like, there are lots of really good people in the world, right? But we are not committed to that goodness, and there are few really bad folks in the world, but they're very committed to disrupting the world, right? So they succeed most of the time. But if all of us decide that, we're going to put our own little version of goodness back into the world, so that, and which is what I think you're doing with these sort of interviews, like you said, these human conversations allow people to actually think, to feel, to connect, to realize how worthy their humanity is, how good it is to share that humanity with others, it changes people's lives,
Yeah, exactly.
You never know who's listening or who is reading or who, and what it's going to do to them, you never know.
Yeah, well, you're a living example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so thank you for this, thank you for what you're doing, because we all have these choices where we could just go on with our lives because probably we're successful at it and we don't need to care about what we have the choices, but like you, like other people decide, let's put something back into the mix that's gonna make a difference, and that's what changes the world.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm just here standing in front of a microphone asking people to tell their stories, but yeah, you're true. It's true though. If you can connect these amazing people with as I say, the ear holes of the world, then we will. I mean, be the I forget what's the Gandhi quote now. Be what you want to see in the world. I think it is.
See in the world, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So,
and on top of it, on your birthday, I want to give you a birthday shout out. Happy birthday! Chat up with me about all these things,
Well, thank you. Like I said, I genuinely was excited.
I hope have a drink later and toast. Right?
There we go. We can put the video back on Skype. All right. Well, there's a couple more questions, and then I will let you go. The next one is there a person that you can think of that you would recommend to be another guest on this podcast?
Oh yeah. Wow. I mean, I'll be very selfish. I would say my wife probably, but I don't know if she'll want to, because I think she's done some really incredible work. In the sense that the work that she does, there are very few women who do this type of work. So you imagine she's been doing it since she's in her 20s, 20-something-year-old. And I'm not just saying it because my wife, drop dead gorgeous, beautiful woman, lawyer background, grew up in Paris in the U.S., Congolese, Iranian mix, is how beautiful she is. And then she goes and negotiates with warlords to release children from all over the world.
Yeah, I would say I would love to have her on. I mean, you don't have to sell it to me. If she would,
I'll try to convince her.
All right, well, yeah, we'll work on her.
I think she still has some charm over her. I believe she's still. I'll exercise some of them.
Brilliant. All right, well, I will take that as a fantastic answer. I mean, that sounds like an incredible woman to get on the show. All right, so the very last thing before we just talk about where to find the books and your work, what do you do these days to decompress, like when you want to blow off some steam?
I like to play. I play football, soccer. So I like to play a nice game. I also like running. I go for long runs. In fact, I was thinking tomorrow I want to do 10 miles. So sometimes I'll run 10 miles, 5 miles or something like that. So I run and I play football, and then I listen to music. And I like dancing, so I listen to good music. I'm in Nigeria, where the music is absolutely incredible. So you can really go to a nice place and dance. So these are the things I do to decompress. And usually on the weekend, I try not to. There's so many things going on in the world. So usually on the weekend, sometimes I try, on Fridays, particularly Saturdays, I try to just turn things off and just have fun, and return to the world again on Sunday, and see what has been broken while I've been gone.
Well, I need to do that more often. I'm kind of stuck on my devices with this whole podcast thing, so I got to take your advice on that one. Take the weekend off.
Yeah, no, from time to time I got to take a day off, because when you come back refreshed and you're ready to face it, yeah, that's what I do.
Brilliant. All right, so the very last thing then. So which sites do you recommend for people to find the books? And then are there any other sites, social media, any other arena on the internet that people can find you, or even just causes that you're trying to bring to everyone's attention?
Well, I mean, my books can be found in any bookstore, really, but independent, non-independent, on Amazon, anywhere you can find the books and buy them. So that's what I would say. What else? Where you can find me, I have a Twitter handle. It's the verified one at Ishmael Beah, because there are others that pretend to be me. And then I have a website, which is www.ishmaelbeah.com. And basically on there and on my Twitter, it highlights the things that I'm up to, where I am, what I'm doing. I tend to tweet about these things. Yeah, so that's the best way. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'll have all those links on the webpage that I do with this podcast. You can find at jamesgearing.com. So Ishmael, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm always a little worried when I interview someone that I haven't got to really talk to before, as to the time constraints and everything. And here we are sitting right at 2 hours of conversation. So thank you so much for being so generous. I hope I haven't kept you from something, but I didn't want to cut this story short. Your story is incredible. Who you are and the journey you've become and how you've inspired me personally, selfishly. I know it's going to inspire so many people. So I just want to say that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you as well for doing this on your birthday, and happy birthday again. Go celebrate. You have a good day. Yeah?
I will.
drink a pint for me or something. As I always say in the UK, drink a pint for me.
It is. It's funny because you were saying like football and then we're correcting it to soccer and then flat, and I think you said apartment.
Yeah, exactly. Because I just came back from London. I just came back the other day from London. I was in London for about a week, so and I'm from a British colony. So when I'm in London, all my British English kick back in. So then when I'm talking to people from the US, I have to realize that I'm talking.
Yeah, exactly. I have to be bilingual over here.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, and I would love to, to reconnect at some point, and maybe in the future do a touch base, and I'd love to get your wife on if she was wanting to, and if she's not, I totally understand.
Okay, I'll talk to her and see what she says. And you are where? You are in Florida, right? You say you're in.
Yes. Yes, sir. So yeah, if ever you're coming over to Florida, please let me know. I'd love to.
Yeah. No, from time to time, I get speaking engagement at these universities out there. So if I do, I'll certainly let you know.